Folks, hope you all are doing well. I'm Karan Bandal from Econosite, your weekly wrap on economic news from India and around the world. So let's get started. The global economy needs a new powerhouse. If you have been following this channel, you might have noticed that our past few weekly updates are full of themes like inflation, a global problem, China's zero COVID strategy strangles global supply chains, and global growth, a major concern in the near term. So along came this Bloomberg article stating that there is potentially one country that can bail the global economy out, India. Let's look at some of the key points from their analysis. India is benefiting from several factors converging in India's favor. First, US-China rivalry is providing a tailwind to India's growth. Many Western companies, as part of their China Plus One supply chain strategy, will move operations to India since India, the largest democracy in the world, is seen as more closely aligned with the democratic values. Companies are more likely to team up with a reliable partner going forward, shifting their focus from just cost efficiency to resiliency in regards to supply chain. Second, as powerhouses from China to Germany contend with slowing growth, India remains one of the only three that can generate more than $400 billion in annual economic output. Companies would want to share in that growth. Third, the sophistication in India's foreign policy is on display for everyone to see. In the wake of Russia-Ukraine war, India has managed to strike up multiple alliances and followed an unapologetic self-interest to boost purchase of Russian oil, ignoring the pressure from Washington, yet has been successful in maintaining positive relations with all the warring factions. All this has helped India keep input prices under control, helping its economic growth. There is hardly any country on the map today that does not seek good relations with India. Fourth, since 2014, when BJP government came into power under the leadership of current Prime Minister Modi, spend on capital expenditure has skyrocketed. In the last 8 years, it has grown to 8 times to roughly $85 billion in financial year 23. As a result, India's national highway network grew more than 50% longer, domestic air passengers roughly doubled, rail network expanded significantly, and a vast biometric system helped several hundred million people open bank accounts for the first time, heralding a new era of financial inclusion. Finally, around 2017, BJP rolled out probably its most influential tax reform, goods and services tax. This unified India as a single economic zone under one tax, subsuming overlapping federal and state taxes. This has led to government collecting double or triple the tax amount they were getting in the previous regime, thus enabling them to spend on capital expenditure so heavily without incurring significant debt. There are challenges, of course, and without tackling them, India cannot go too far in its growth journey. Income inequality is a major problem. India is a young country with a population of roughly 1.4 billion. Its middle class, still far too small, and super wealthy here are growing faster than anywhere else. India needs a policy framework for broader wealth creation to fully capture nation's demographic dividend. India's youth unemployment is another related issue. Some younger workers seeking white-collar jobs are deferring employment rather than working in a factory. About half of potential workers under the age of 30 aren't even looking for jobs. These issues need to be addressed with urgency. But as a package, India's story looks promising, and we are likely to see India truly take off over the next decade. Let's move on to China. China's reopening comes with an inflation bomb. Inflation observed in major parts of the world economy and primarily in the US has been slowing faster than expected based on the data as recent as from December 22. Global inflation thus has been slowing. But there is a risk emerging to this trend from China. As China sheds its zero COVID policy and opens up after 3 years of being under lockdown, experts expect a sharp rebound in demand for goods and services. This may seem counterintuitive at first, and you're right, because in the US and the rest of the developed world, over the course of the pandemic, citizens were offered direct payments to help cope with lockdowns. So once the lockdowns were lifted, citizens had amassed massive cash reserves to go out and spend. For example, just in the case of US, households had built up $2 trillion in excess savings. This resulted in a V-shaped recovery in demand and stoked inflation along the way. In case of China though, no direct payments to citizens were made over the course of lockdowns. Having said that, economists at Nomura Holdings point out Chinese households have indeed built up excess reserves to the tune of $720 billion, primarily driven by savings. Savers were motivated by the slump in China property values and surge in youth unemployment. You can see a massive jump in China's household savings in 2022. So, experts predict a likelihood of two forms of inflationary shock coming out of China. First, surge in infections will lead to non-mandatory lockdowns in China, with factories struggling to keep operations going as sick workers stay home. This will create a supply shock. Then demand shock will come when Chinese consumers resume spending in force, pushing up commodity prices for the rest of the world. And this is the inflation risk to keep an eye on in 2023. Continuing on the China topic, what a shrinking population means for China and the world. 2023 is not shaping up to be a good year for China so far. Their economic growth for 2022 came in lower than the target at 3%. COVID infections, hospitalizations are surging, and now the report on population indicates that for the first time since 1961, China's population has declined. This is not a mere blip, but an onset of a long-term trend. China introduced one-child policy in 1979 to control its population. At the time, China's fertility rate was already dropping quite sharply at 2.7, that is 2.7 children per couple. A fertility rate of 2.1 is considered as the replacement level fertility rate. That is, at this rate, a nation's population will neither grow nor decline. By 1991, China's fertility rate had dropped below the population replacement level to 1.9. It stayed below the replacement level for the last 3 decades and dropped even more sharply from 2017 at 1.8 to 2020 at just 1.3. Assuming China maintains its current fertility rate of around 1.3 children per couple, which it may not, it is expected that by the end of the century, China's population will fall by 45%. In short, this is a seismic shift. It will have symbolic and substantive impact on China's 3 main areas: economy, society, and politics. Let's cover the economic aspect of it. In the space of 40 years, China made impressive strides and built its economy based on manufacturing and the service industry. This was a labor-intensive model of economic growth, and they could do that because they had an almost unlimited supply of labor at low cost. With growth came increases in the standard of living, income levels, and labor cost. China can no longer rely on this model since countries like India and Vietnam are able to offer the same value proposition at a lower labor cost. China has not been able to transform its economic model from exports-driven one to a domestic consumption-driven one like it is in the case of the US or India. Now the supply of labor needed to keep up the growth in exports is shrinking and sinking like a rock. This presents many short-term and long-term challenges for the policy makers in China. So China's growth prospects seem cloudy, but who knows, they may be able to turn things around by embarking on an automation spree in response to a decline in labor force. We'll see. What we can expect this year is a high likelihood of spike in global inflation coming out of China. And India is the economy to observe as its growth potential unfolds, and in the process, will it offer solutions to some of the world's problems? I hope you enjoyed this week's wrap. I'll speak with you again next week. Until then, take care.